Europa ha patit molts canvis en la seva geografia política al llarg de la seva història. En l'actualitat, sembla que tot ha arribat al seu clímax amb la creació de la Comunitat Europea, però el poder dels estats tradicionals evita que algunes nacions se sentin representades i busquin més autogovern o fins i tot la independència. A Catalunya estem vivint un d'aquests processos, aparentment amb molta més força i suport popular que les altres regions. Però al nord de la vella Europa hi ha un moviment que ha tingut molta importància aquests últims mesos. Parlem d'Escòcia, on vam anar per intentar entendre una mica més què buscaven i què volien canviar amb la independència. Vam poder viure els dies previs i posteriors al referèndum. Ara volem que vostès els visquin amb nosaltres. Agafem el cotxe fins a Dundee, on hem quedat amb dues persones partidàries del sí. Per què creus que Escòcia estarà millor independitzada del Regne Unit? Et consideres un nacionalista escocès?
Well, I'm a cultural nationalist before a political nationalist, but I realise that it's necessary for political control to support the culture. My first language was Scots. My mother tongue was Scots, and it was a language that was looked down upon in education. One of the ironies of a Scottish education was that you were given a little prize one day a year for reciting the poetry of Robert Burns in Scots, and then you were punished the other 364 days for speaking his language. So that's the kind of thing I want to change dramatically. A lot of people have gone through their education without knowing a single word of Scottish literature. So part of the problem with the Scottish cringe, the slave mentality as the Catalans call it, is that a lot of people are not educated in their own culture. If they were, more people would be involved in the national movement. But it's remarkable that so many people have come out for the national movement, and I will vote yes.
Quin creus que és l'origen del moviment independentista escocès?
Well, it's been building up since the 1970s with deindustrialisation, with Mrs. Thatcher, who was very right-wing and who alienated the Scots by imposing unpopular policies on them. And eventually the realisations from people on the left that perhaps the only way they would change things would be to vote for Scottish nationalism.
So would you say it's more cultural?
Creus que tot el que està passant té un origen més cultural o econòmic?
The culture is part of it because, for example, the writers have been in the vanguard of this for centuries. Scottish writers, Scottish literature have led the national movement. The politicians have followed. So the culture is important, although the culture has not been a big thing in this referendum because they are trying to appeal to people who aren't ethnically Scottish. It's been a much broader appeal to try and get. There's English for independence, Irish for independence, Polish for independence, Asians for independence. As a Scot who loves the traditions of my country, the egalitarian traditions of my country, the sovereignty of my country that goes back for centuries and centuries, the multi-ethnic, multilingual nature of my country, which I'm very proud of, the native languages, Scots and Gaelic, which need to be fostered, need to be encouraged, the brilliant literary tradition that we have needs to be fostered, needs to be encouraged because a lot of people have not been educated in our own culture or in our own history. Once we are educated in that, then there will be no problem in the future. We will all immediately identify first and foremost as Scots. The duality, if you like, has been part of this cultural colonisation that's going on for the past 3 centuries. The Catalans are well aware of that, living in a state like Spain. So I hope that the people win a victory over the state, because that's what it's come down to. It's the huge power of the state versus the hopes and aspirations of the people, and I hope the Scottish people win.
We coordinate
a lot of the yes movements in Dundee. We supply literature and merchandise to various street stalls, and just act as a central hub for people to come in, to ask questions, to people who have unanswered questions, mainly, who want more clarity on what this could mean for them and for the future of Scotland.
Com ha canviat el moviment del Yes a Scotland en els 2 últims anys?
It's got massively bigger. It's been an animal that has grown and grown, and where there was a lot of coordination in the beginning, as time has progressed, there's been a lot of fragmentation, which has worked. It's been good.
Quina és la teva opinió sobre la gent que ve aquí a buscar informació? Què creus que els pot moure a votar a favor de la independència?
Fundamentally, Scotland is a slightly socialist country. We're a left-wing country. We're not far left, but we believe in equality, fairness. We look at our older people who should be treated better than they are. Our disabled should be treated better than they are. The more vulnerable in society, we should be looking after them better. We don't have the control over that at the minute in all the areas that we need. We have certain little bits of control, but we don't control the financing of it. If we governed ourselves, controlled our own financing, we could invest in the areas that are going to improve lives for the people who currently are struggling against the system.
And what's your impression or your
Quina impressió tens sobre la campanya de Westminster i, en general, la campanya del no? Es pot definir per la por al canvi i predir els desastres que poden passar?
I believe that the campaign for no has gathered momentum too. There are many terms that have been used, scaremongering being one of them. I understand their motives for why they want Scotland to remain in the United Kingdom, and I don't think that's based on what is best for the people of Scotland. Whether we look at scaremongering with regards to the currency, which when you understand the whole currency debate, it's actually not that difficult to understand why we will have a currency union, or why it's best for the people of England, Northern Ireland and Wales, as much as it is in the interests of Scotland. We look at a positive future for Scotland. We see change, we see the chance to make Scotland a better place, a wealthier place where we can look after everyone. And we want to put that money to better use for Scotland rather than for Westminster.
a hypothetical yes?
El dia després d'una hipotètica victòria del sí en el referèndum, quins canvis podrien veure els escocesos?
On the back of a yes vote, we go into a negotiation period for 18 months. What I see changing on the back of it is that we've shown that all political parties can come together and work for the betterment of Scotland, which is something that hasn't happened before. We can all get together. Labour, Socialists, Conservatives if they want to get involved. There's alliances that have been built, and I hope that can be built on to make Scotland a better place. If there is a no, we accept it, we move forward and we work forward. I won't be happy, but the yes movement will never go away now. The genie is out of the bottle. People of Scotland, you only have to look at what's happened in the last year to see the support for yes has just grown and grown and grown.
Creus que tot això hagués estat possible sense la figura política de l'Àlex Salmond?
Alex Salmond and the SNP have got us to this point where we can now make this decision. But this is not in any way about Alex Salmond. This is purely about Scotland and the future of Scotland. If you were to look and say it's about Alex Salmond, then that's the same as saying it's about David Cameron. And it's not about either. I think personally he's done a great job getting us here. From here on it's up to us.
El moviment a favor del sí rep més suport d'alguna classe social en concret?
And the yes can deliver a fairer society. And that's, I think, what everybody wants that's voting yes, regardless. It's joined people from different social standings and social circles and different wealth, we've all joined together. Whether we're poor or whether they're rich, it doesn't matter. We've all joined together to campaign for a better and fairer society.
It's about what is the relationship between like the oil and the movement.
Quina relació hi ha entre el descobriment del petroli al Mar del Nord i el moviment independentista? És un tema important en els debats?
The role of that is in this. You think it's important, not very important?
The oil in the debate is very important. Scotland as a nation contributes roughly 8.3% of the national budget from the mainland. If you include the North Sea into that, and bring the oil into that, that 8.3% becomes 9.9%. So it's a massive, massive contribution to the United Kingdom, which is a massive point of why they're trying to hold on to us so much. If we weren't offering anything financially beneficial to the Westminster government, they wouldn't be fighting the way they're fighting. There's no doubt whatsoever. We also have the whole west coast of Scotland, which has never been excavated for oil. It's been tested. We know there's oil there, but unfortunately, the Ministry of Defence wanted to put nuclear weapons into the estuary, so the nuclear submarines, they didn't want to risk any catastrophic incident, so oil exploration there was banned. We know that there is a report that the United Kingdom government did, which was buried and is now available, called the Macron report, which actually talks about how amazingly wealthy Scotland could be if we excavated that part of the waters of Scotland.
El matí següent, 17 de setembre, anem a la Universitat de St Andrews. Allà ens hi espera un altre partidari del sí, però amb motius molt concrets. Abans, però, ens permeten fer algunes fotografies dels preparatius del referèndum.
Part of the Yes campaign since before it was even conceived. I've been working a long game for Scottish independence since 1982.
So what was it like back in 1982?
Ens podries explicar com era el moviment independentista als anys 80?
It was far more fragmented and centred on one political party, which was the Scottish National Party. And I came to it from a slightly different angle. I actually came from a household where my mother was a member of the Conservative Party. My uncle was a candidate to stand for Westminster for the Liberal Democrats. So if I was in Aberdeen, I'd be out campaigning as child labour for the Conservatives, leafleting doors, and if I went to see my uncle in Arbroath, I'd be working for the Liberal Democrats. But in 1982, when we got involved in the Falklands War against Argentina, it was an interesting moment because I found myself swept up in the passion and the emotion for Britishness, but the more I contemplated about what was actually going on and what did this patriotism mean, I started to have my doubts. I've no doubts that the people in the Falklands have got the right to be part of Britain if that's what they so choose and that's what they've voted for and that's what they wanted. I think the Argentinian invasion was wrong, but it acted as a trigger for me to start questioning my previously unquestioned loyalty to my mother, her politics, her party. And I started to think about war in a particular way. And this coincided with me going to Germany. And I found myself hanging out more with people who were discussing what is the nuclear deterrent, what's it about. And actually my process into the independence movement doesn't come through and from a nationalist perspective. It's not a nationalist narrative. It actually came through what do I want politically to happen in this country I live in. And getting rid of nuclear weapons was one of the things that drove that. And I found myself in quite an uncomfortable situation in the 80s, even admitting that, because I felt unpatriotic. I felt that to want to break up this union would be wrong. But it didn't really enter the debate until much later when I realised that the nuclear deterrent is actually based in Scotland, and it's not just the nuclear deterrent being based here, it's all the waste from the nuclear deterrent is here. It gets washed, much of it gets washed into the River Clyde. Only this year the Ministry of Defence have asked if they could increase the amount of nuclear waste that gets washed into the River Clyde. And I find that really quite interesting, that in Britain's third largest city, we have nuclear waste getting deliberately pumped into a river that feeds through the heart of the city. Independence for me is not the top of my priority list. It's about number 10. I have a whole host of other priorities, which would be to remove the world of the nuclear threat, to remove nuclear energy because it's unstable. We've seen recently in too many cases the problems that are inherent with nuclear energy. I want more renewable energy. I want a greener society. I want a fairer society.
And how do you think the independence of
Com creus que la independència contribuirà als objectius que tu aspires?
I think what would then happen is we would vote in a government that would be true to the movement. I think the SNP, the Greens, the Scottish Socialist Party, and many of the people in the Labour Party as well, who are going to vote no or yes, are actually anti the nuclear deterrent. It's likely they would vote in a government that would see through the ideals of the campaign. That's my hope. And if that being the case, then we would probably find ourselves with a centre-left government that would start moving to rid ourselves of the deterrent. They would be able to step in and protect the National Health Service. They would hopefully introduce legislation that would make sure there is more social equality in the country. We've also got 20% of people living below the poverty line, and hopefully whatever government we vote in would do something to address that. Rather than just focusing in on Scots are good at this or Scots have historically been good at that, actually doing something to change the society we live in for the best of everybody who lives here, not just for those who happen to find themselves in a comfortable situation.
Right. And what would Westminster's role be in the case
Quina seria la resposta de Westminster en l'hipotètic cas que guanyés el sí? Quins serien els termes de negociació? Com es dividirien els béns?
That's very difficult. At the moment, obviously the No campaign are playing a game where they say, you will take your share of the debt, you will get none of the assets, you will, it's posturing. I think anybody who is reasonably inclined would agree that the No campaign almost has to say this. They're forced into taking this approach of saying you can't share the pound, of course you'll take all the debt. It's a scare tactic. It's a scare tactic that doesn't seem to be working. As I understand it, Westminster would be obliged to negotiate a fair settlement. Whether we vote yes or no this week, I think the Scottish National Party will be there. For instance, if we vote no, I think they will still get maybe as many votes again next time round, because they've proved that they are secure in governance.
Creus que hi ha molta gent que amb la independència busca més justícia social?
There are certainly people there who prioritise social justice as the main thing. It's called the poverty gap. The gap between the 1% of people who own X amount of the land compared to those people who live in housing estates, people who've always felt disenfranchised. Yes, they've always been allowed to vote, but did they really feel that their vote would make a difference? What happens to those people on Friday if we vote no? We in the Yes campaign have got an obligation then to keep working for them. Friday's not the end. It can't be the end of it. You can't give people hope. What would happen now if they said they wouldn't give more powers, even in the event of a no vote? I think that would be more civic disruption, but I would hope that it would be in the way that the campaign's been conducted. Non-violent. It's great that I can sit here in my office, I can go out in the street, and I can meet people from the No campaign who feel as passionately as I do, and we can talk civilly about it. If either way, yes or no, what I hope Europe learns from this is you can have a civilised dialogue and ask searching questions. Whatever happens on Friday, the United Kingdom is suffering a near-death experience right now. And it's going to wake up the population of, hopefully, England to the fact you don't have to just tolerate this. You can actually move on to force through change that will affect everybody's lives, but you don't have to be violent about it. It doesn't have to go to armed struggle. Armed struggle will provoke a negative response wherever it goes. Throwing bricks, petrol bombing buildings. It's a thing. It's a form of protest of the past, and we know that the big states can clamp down on it. We know they can crush it. What they can't deal with is erudite argument, peaceful protest, people asking big questions and holding their government to account and saying, "You serve us, we don't serve you."
Segons sembla, el problema de les armes nuclears fa que molta gent estigui disposada a votar sí. Però què en pensa la gent que viu a prop d'aquestes bases militars? Per esbrinar-ho, anem a la costa oest.
I have a particular interest in the referendum campaign because part of the agenda from the Scottish Government, the SNP, if they have a successful yes vote, they have made it clear that they want all the nuclear submarines removed from Faslane, which is part of my ward. And there's over 10,000 jobs that are dependent on that area. So that would have a major economic impact on the area here, an adverse impact.
Així que les seves principals preocupacions serien respecte al futur de les bases militars.
That's one of the main concerns. Clearly, I also have concerns nationally on the impact on Scotland as a whole. Right. But apart from the national concerns, there's the local concerns which are of particular interest to myself. But certainly, from my own point of view, I certainly do not support the independence campaign. I am hoping that we will have a no vote tomorrow and that life will return to normal again for a few years.
Per tant, en aquesta àrea no hi ha molta gent donant suport a la independència?
Yeah, I think there are some people in this area who support the independence agenda. You know, there's a split, but in this area there's far more people who are opposed to the independence agenda than support it.
Diuen que en aquesta zona hi ha petroli. Creu que és un bon argument per demanar la independència?
Oil revenue, we hear different figures on oil revenue. The SNP are talking about 24 billion barrels or thereabouts left in the North Sea, whereas other experts who are well respected are saying, well, 15.5 to 16 billion. And so the SNP, the argument is the SNP are overestimating the oil reserves in the North Sea by up to 60%. And that is really concerning. And of course the fluctuation in oil values as well could have a major impact on the income to an independent Scotland, independent government.
Voting with our heart, we would probably vote yes, you know, but you've got to be more realistic than just vote with your heart, you know, I'm Scottish all my life, you know, sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, but there's a lot of outstanding questions, more questions than answers at this time, and it's only after tomorrow's vote that we get a result either way that I'm sure some of these questions will then hopefully be answered. If they did get a yes vote, then they would be starting off with a deficit of, I think it's £6 billion, and John Swinney, part of the Scottish Government, has said that they plan to borrow, I think it's £5 or £6 billion in the first year. Well, of course, if they don't pay off their debts, then the cost of borrowing that money, could be far more expensive. So, as I say, there's still a number of questions that are on the table. Yeah, people have had 2 years of this now, and they've had a massive information thrown at them. And the SNP and the Scottish Government haven't answered very many questions. You know, the currency, EU, NATO, and various other things. My own view is that the majority of those who have made up their mind now, who are still undecided, I think are more likely to vote no.
And probably it'll be the biggest vote that Scotland's ever had in the history of Scotland or England, probably in that case, because according to what I've been told, there's about if all the people that go out that's registered, there's about 90% of people registered in Scotland to vote, and that has never ever happened. I mean, general elections you're looking at 40%, you know, so it's certainly made people...
People have certainly been motivated.
Es pon el sol a Escòcia, llar d'escriptors, de professors, de filòsofs, treballadors, pescadors i ramaders. A tots ells demà els criden per votar i decidir el futur del seu país. Arribem a Glasgow. La gent camina pel carrer, tranquil·la. Si no fos per alguns diaris i els voluntaris del sí i del no fent campanya pel carrer per intentar convèncer indecisos a última hora, ningú diria la transcendència que pot tenir aquest dia per a Escòcia. Ets gaire optimista respecte a la promesa de més autogovern a la que s'han compromès?
Scotland had a referendum for devolution in 1979, and they made lots of threats then and lots of promises, and they promised more powers and we didn't get more powers.
Yeah.
And at the moment, so the leaders of the main parties have promised more powers, but they've not said what the powers will be. They've just said a timetable to agree more powers.
Right.
So if Scotland was actually to get more powers, what would need to happen would be they'd need to agree on what powers Scotland got. They would need to get it through the House of Commons, and lots of backbench MPs have said they wouldn't vote for it, so I don't know if that would happen. If it got through the House of Commons, it would then have to go through the House of Lords, which I don't know if it's true. I've heard it's the biggest unelected parliamentary body outside of China.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of ifs.
I think we're best placed to represent the views of our own people, absolutely. However, I don't think we're best placed to support the views and to represent the views of our entire country nationwide and European-wide and globally-wide, which is what the UK currently does, you know. If I've just got married, you know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I'm thinking about kids, I'm looking to buy a house. Now, I worry tomorrow if I buy a house for, you know, £500,000, which is a lot of money. What happens to the banks? Does my interest rate go up?
En els 2 últims anys, quines han estat les preguntes que des del teu punt de vista no han estat aclarides per la campanya del sí? Moltes persones es queixen de la quantitat d'incerteses del procés.
Let me be clear, I think I like the idea of independence. I like the idea of being not free, but I like the idea of being independent and making our own decisions and knowing where the money's coming from and going to. However, the Yes campaign for me has not adequately defined what's going to happen to her pension that has been contributed to by the UK. People in Scotland, you know, the Yes campaigners will say, yeah, we will get the pound. However, you have to remember the reaction that this campaign is going to provoke. Should it
in Westminster?
Yeah. They might, the English people, the Welsh people who are still part of the United Kingdom, will have a right to turn around and say, do you know what, we don't want to share currency.
Estàs satisfet amb la forma en què el govern britànic ha portat la campanya?
I think the British government came into it too late.
Yeah.
I think they should have been right from the very beginning. You know, the love that they're showing now, they should have shown that love at the very beginning. It seems
Sembla desesperat.
I don't think desperate. I think it seems last minute. I don't think there's any desperation about it. I think it was overconfidence.
Yeah.
I don't. In some way, I kind of see why they're overconfident. They don't see the issues that we see here. Their reaction has been definitely to the loudness of the Yes campaign. You know, I watched something horrific 2 days ago. I watched a girl at the set of lights going home, and somebody tried to put a Yes flyer through her window at the lights, and she said, I don't want it, I'm voting no. And literally within 2 minutes, there was people rocking her van, her car. I was 2-3 cars behind, and I said to my wife, should I get out? And she was like, no, don't get out. Yeah, I was like, this is crazy. It was just outside a Yes shop on the way home. It was just, I'm sure that only represents a minority, but you know what? It only takes a minority to ruin it for everyone. You see it in sport, you see it in everything. It takes a minority to give everyone a bad name.
Yeah.
I think the referendum had to happen. I think because a lot of people, 30% of the population, 40% of the population wanted it to happen. And I think in democracy you really have to listen to these things. I think the negative effect of not listening to it is more dangerous than ignoring it. I mean, this is not, people refer to this campaign as Braveheart and this and that and blah blah blah. This is not a movie. This is not a movie. This is real, man. Yeah. This is real mortgages. This is real lives.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you. Cheers to you. I'm very excited and positive about what's going on right now in Scotland. Fingers crossed we'll have a good turnout, and that's the most important part for us. I want to see that Scotland is better represented in a democratic way, and that's why we'll be voting yes.
Finalment arribem a George Square. Allà hi ha una munió de gent celebrant la transcendència d'aquest gran dia.
Well, the Greens and Alex Salmond are voting aye. Yes, the Greens and Alex Salmond are voting aye. Yes, the Greens and Alex Salmond, but by no means Joanne Lamond. The Greens and Alex Salmond are voting aye. Singing aye, aye, we are voting aye. Singing aye, aye, we are voting aye. Singing aye, aye, we are paid. We don't want to get paid. Aye, we are voting aye. Well, Scotland is gonna keep the pound. Yes, Scotland is gonna keep the pound. And if England tries to stop us, we'll simply just say sound. But Scotland is gonna keep the pound. Aye, aye, we are voting aye. Saying aye, aye, we are voting aye. Saying aye, aye, we are paying. We don't want to get paid. Aye, aye, we are voting aye. Yourself and granny off the bus. If you stop all over bus passes will make a fuss. We will head down to England to number 10 and kick old David Cameron in the pus. Singing aye, aye, we are voting aye. Singing aye, aye, we are voting aye. Singing aye, aye, we are paid. We don't want you to pay. Singing aye, we are voting aye. Singing aye, we are voting aye. Singing aye, we are paid. We don't want you to pay. Aye, aye, we are voting aye.
Però, per desgràcia de tots els presents a George Square aquella tarda, el 19 de setembre a la matinada anuncien els resultats. Un 44,7% ha votat sí i un 55,3% no. Els partidaris de Yes Scotland accepten els resultats amb resignació. Hi ha un 55,3% de la població que avui dormirà més tranquil·la, ja que, segons sembla, hi ha molta gent que ha votat no per convicció, però també per por a les incerteses que plantejava el procés. Cal destacar la participació que ha estat del 84,6%. Tornem a George Square. Allà ens trobem una concentració de gent celebrant la victòria del no, entre algun reducte de partidaris del sí. Excepte algun petit incident, en general no hi ha gaires actes violents.
I think you have to be the union. I don't think we're enough to keep us going in Scotland. But we are British, that's what we grew up with. All through wars, all from First World Wars to Second World War, fought together, and hopefully there's no more fighting. We can go on as a country, as one. We could be.
Creus que tens sort de viure en un país on pots votar en un referèndum?
Certainly do, definitely, and it should be peaceful. This is the way you should vote. No need for violence. Not at all.
So are you happy?
Estàs content de com s'ha portat tot això aquests últims dies?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Què en penses dels resultats?
I'm really disappointed. But you know, from the beginning it was always against all the odds. You know, it was the whole establishment, the press, all the political class, everything was against us. So even to get so close, it was something, you know. It was just I think we lost it with the old folk, you know. Yeah. And that's people who don't have social media, and they don't have Twitter, and they can't find out the other information. So they get the papers and they see the BBC, and they only get one side of things, and things that tell them that they're going to lose their pensions.
Per on creus que aniran els trets a partir d'ara? I les negociacions amb Westminster?
It's going to be interesting what happens with what they promised when they came out the day before, 2 days before the vote, and said, we vow to give all you these extra powers. We're not going to say what they are or when we're going to give them to you.
Right.
All these people who voted no because maybe they were reassured by the fact that they got extra powers and things, they're going to feel cheated.
Yeah.
You know.
So there could be...
Creus que hi pot haver una reacció negativa si ells es fan enrere?
There'll be a lot of anger.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is, you know, there's been so much energy and enthusiasm for this.
Després de veure la reacció d'un i altre sector, anem a la zona on ha guanyat el no amb més contundència. Ens referim al sud d'Escòcia, la zona coneguda com a Scottish Borders, frontera escocesa, on un 66,6% del cens ha votat no a la independència.
So how do you feel, or what's your impression?
Quina és la teva impressió dels resultats? Creus que a partir d'ara hi haurà canvis?
Well, I think the first thing is to say that I'm very much relieved by the no vote, because I think that we would have gone into even more turmoil if it had been a vote for independence, because there were so many uncertainties as to what would happen in the longer term. There was going to be so much change. What we now seem to have is that there is a vote for change, but within the existing borders. That Scotland will gain more powers. I think those powers will largely be financial. We need to be able to raise our own. I'm a Liberal Democrat, and we have always believed in what was described as home rule for Scotland under a federal arrangement. But that implies that there would be a level of home rule for Wales, home rule for Northern Ireland. And effectively, I suppose that means assemblies within parts of England, which would reflect what the priorities of the areas of England are as well.
Ets optimista respecte a les promeses que ha fet Westminster? Creus que les compliran, encara que no hagin especificat en què consisteixen?
Oh, I think they have to. A vote of 55% to 45% shows a significant support for a level of independence and home rule. Right? If that was not carried through, if those extra powers were not developed and devolved, so it would be the proverbial own goal. If, in football terms, if those powers were not given, there would be no conceivable defence against independence the next time.
Què en penses del tema monetari? Quina part de la qüestió ha de preocupar la gent i quina forma part de la tàctica de la por?
I don't think it will scare tactics. I think each side puts a positive interpretation on it in their terms. Quite clearly, in my view, the currency union is the sensible option, but for the independence movement to say that they wanted the currency option means that they would then be subordinate to the needs of the Bank of England. And since the Bank of England and the English lobby would be greater than the Scottish lobby, I think, where is the independence coming in? They would not have been able to take on full control of the financial system because they would still be under the theories and the practicalities required by the Bank of England. Oh, I think in their terms, they would have needed to go to an entirely new currency. Our knitwear industry, our textile industry here, went through bad times round about 10, 20 years ago. They are now recovering. They have an industry which produces quality products, and they want to continue that recovery. They don't want it being undermined by uncertainty. And we need the employment in this town, and that employment is focused on the knitwear industry.
Were you surprised or
Et va sorprendre o vas trobar normal que el referèndum fos permès pel govern d'Anglaterra?
by the government in England?
I think I was probably a little surprised to begin with. Do I think referenda should be held? Yes, I do.
If the government had said...
Si el govern s'hagués negat a permetre el referèndum i a negociar, quin hagués estat l'efecte social? Creus que hagués tingut un impacte més negatiu que simplement deixar la gent votar?
No, I don't. It's often said that Scottish people don't get excited about anything.
I agree.
Yeah, we tend to be a bit more calm and almost inert, unless it becomes like of an international football match or an international rugby match and the like. But no, we don't normally get excited. I suspect that if the demand for a referendum had not been granted, then we would have had perhaps more intense discussion in the Scottish Government in Edinburgh, in the Parliament, and it may have led to even more Scottish nationalist members of the Scottish Parliament being elected, perhaps out of a frustration. But no, I really don't see it as having led to anything revolutionary. Right. I wonder if there is, in looking back, a feeling that David Cameron, or at least the government in Westminster, had opened Pandora's box, and by allowing the referendum, they had suddenly released a load of possibilities that they perhaps could not then control. But the Scottish situation may be controllable because you can give these extra powers that we talk about. But what is going to be the impact on Wales? What's going to be the impact on Northern Ireland? And very particularly, what is going to be the impact on the House of Commons and the government in Westminster? What process has suddenly been begun which will change things in the English regions forever?
Aquesta àrea aquí acostuma a votar. Conservadora. Per tant, estàs contenta dels resultats del referèndum?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 67% of the voters voted no. I think that there's going to be an interesting discussion now about what the result actually meant. Right. Because there's a real question about what was the understanding of what people were voting for. I mean, it was a long process, a very long process, but it seemed to me and to many people I spoke to that people struggled with actually what they really were voting for.
What do you mean? Què vols dir?
Well, what was on offer was an awful lot of maybes, ifs, promises, and people got increasingly confused by the two sides and what they were saying and what they were suggesting and what they were purporting to be fact and what they were purporting not to be fact. And I do think the government was surprised, the Yes camp were very surprised that they didn't win it. and they're now talking about, oh well, they didn't win it because everybody was frightened. That's not my impression. People weren't frightened. People were very clear about what they were voting for and why they were voting. But what they were very confused about in many cases is actually what was the supposed benefit. And the supposed benefit was a yes to everything, and you can't say yes to everything, and that put a lot of people off. You know, you can't say sort of, yes, you can have a completely green country, but yes, the country's going to run off the benefits of fossil fuel. They're contradictory. Right. So, you know, I think if you're arguing about the future of a country, you need to be much more sort of grounded in what you're arguing for. And I don't think there was grounded argument. I think it was incredibly confusing for people. So actually, it became very emotive, and it was driven on the idea that if you didn't have everything you wanted, vote yes and you'd get everything you want. Now, there's now a lot of dissatisfied people who feel they've been cheated out of everything they were going to get. We have to find a way now of satisfying people's desires. But you can't please all the people all the time.
No.
You know, they wanted a democratic vote on whether Scotland should be independent. That democratic vote took place, and they democratically voted no.
Right.
If you have a democratic vote and you lose, do you then cede to the people who actually won?
Yeah.
Or do you say, sorry, I don't accept that democratic vote? In which case, are you really saying actually that democracy doesn't work unless it gives you what you want?
True.
So that's a huge question. I think it would be more realistic. The question on the paper was, should Scotland be an independent country? The answer was no. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is fine the way it is and we don't need to change anything. That when you look at Scotland's future as a document, it is hollow, it's empty, you know, it has no concrete future for Scotland. It's a wish list of wishy-washy claims.
Right.
You know, I was really gobsmacked, to be honest, when I looked at it. I thought, is this really all they've managed to come up with after 40 odd years of thinking about it? That they hadn't thought through how they would satisfy the contradictory desires of many of the parties that they took on board, whether it was the Socialists or the Greens or whatever. They hadn't really thought through that. They were just saying, hey, get on board, you can all have what you want so long as you vote yes. It's a dangerous game to play with a country, very dangerous game. And business people who create the wealth in Scotland needed something a little bit more tangible. They weren't going to gamble their business futures with it, their employees' futures, their families' futures. You know, I mean, if they had given me something really concrete, I might have considered it. I certainly looked at everything that had to be said. But it was far too hollow to throw away 300 years of solid forward motion. Crazy.
Després d'entendre millor com pensen els habitants de la frontera escocesa, tornem cap a Edimburg.
I've been kind of editor of the arts campaign website National Collective for the last year or so, kind of just running the website and doing a lot of work on that, just campaigning for Scottish independence for the last 2-3 years.
Do you think there's anything in hindsight that the SNP could have done?
Creus que hi ha alguna cosa que l'SNP podia haver fet diferent per foragitar les pors, les preocupacions i els dubtes de la gent? Molts votants ens han dit que veien el procés ple d'incerteses.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we could have done. We have done absolutely everything in terms of we're fighting against the entire British state and British establishment, and they've thrown absolutely everything at us, and we still managed to increase our percentage in the polls from 30% 2 years ago to 45% now, which is an incredible achievement in itself. And we managed to get 97% of people signed up to vote, which is unprecedented. Give a bit more time, we'll get there.
Okay. What did you think about?
Què t'ha semblat la cobertura mediàtica?
It was just really poor from start to finish. You look at the newspapers, obviously they've got no reason to be impartial. But when you look at the coverage from things like the BBC, I mean, I wouldn't say it's been biased myself, but it's just been poor coverage. They've not covered the debate in any sort of depth. if you look at the referendum night coverage itself on Thursday night into Friday morning, for the first time in the whole campaign, they'd kind of laid out an in-depth timetable for what would happen after a yes vote in terms of when we'd have an army by, when we'd have welfare powers by, when we'd get rid of Trident. That was the first time they'd done that in the whole campaign. It was 2 hours too late.
Quin és el següent pas?
We'll have to wait and see. Depends. We'll have to look in the next couple of years, or at least in the next 9 months, with the UK general election coming up as well. We've got a chance of another referendum coming up in the near future, definitely.
A poc ens hem anat assabentant de com i per què alguns escocesos volen o no esdevenir un estat independent. Però què haguessin fet si els haguessin prohibit votar legalment, com ha passat en el cas de Catalunya?
They could have done that. They could have said, no, you're not having a referendum. It has been allowed. I didn't think they expected it to be what it's been.
So I don't understand why, when you get the mass demonstrations you see in Barcelona, that the government can't see that sooner or later something's got to give. And if a government is scared to ask its people a question, that government is in trouble. The government has got the responsibility. The government is there to serve the people, not the other way around. And if the people of Catalonia demand the right of self-determination, then it would be a foolish government indeed that didn't grant it.
If you're a democratic society, then the people, clearly in Scotland elected the Scottish government, and part of the reasons for that within their manifesto was to allow a referendum to be held, then I don't think any democratic government could have had or should have had the right to be able to refuse that.
Because the United Kingdom is fundamentally democratic. And when Scotland delivered an SNP government, there was an inevitability that we would end up with a referendum. Now, there's a lot of argument about whether Scotland actually voted for an SNP government with intentionally, or whether it arrived by default, because the Labour vote collapsed. But I think the reality is, once they were given a majority government, everybody understood that they would then, that was their raison d'etre, that's what they had always stood on, to campaign for an independent Scotland. So it would have been very undemocratic if the UK government had said, no, you can't have the referendum.
I find it entirely undemocratic in terms of the Spanish government. The way they're acting in terms of blocking a referendum is just not, obviously having seen it in Scotland, it's just not what should be done, because we've had a great chance to have a conversation about politics and engage people for the first time in their lives. Obviously, people seem more engaged in Catalonia already. We could never get 1.8 million people out in the streets campaigning. We couldn't even get 1.8 million people out to vote on the day in terms of a yes vote. So it's kind of it's different in Catalonia, a different situation obviously, but it does seem strange looking from an outsider's point of view that they would not allow a referendum. But I think it's obviously down to the fact that it's more likely to be a yes vote in Catalonia than it was in Scotland.
Com hem pogut anar veient al llarg d'aquest reportatge, els escocesos han escollit quedar-se dins el Regne Unit. Ara esperen les reformes que els han promès els líders de Westminster. Si compleixen, les reivindicacions independentistes es calmaran durant una temporada. La pregunta és, fins quan?